Okay, I'll now turn it over to Herbert MacKenzie for a little bit of insight into the educational system.
That's just so you know, there's not an imposter up here. It's really me. Anyway, I'm a little dismayed to find out that I'm restricted to 1 hour, but I'll do my best to get through everything in 1 hour. I notice a couple of good academics here in the audience in front of me, and there's a couple more behind me that I've seen, so some of you will appreciate this. Before I start talking about my experiences at university, I want to talk about a little piece of research that was done at the University of Connecticut, University of Southern Connecticut, back in 1990 by a Professor James. And he calls it the dead grandmother problem. Now, those of you who are in academia understand what dead grandmothers are all about. In England, they have the same thing, but they call them the graveyard grannies. And he found that grandmothers are much more susceptible to dying at exam time than grandfathers are. And I can attest that from my experience, I've had 30 or 40 grandmothers die at exam time over my course of my teaching. I can only remember 1 or 2 grandfathers. So grandmothers are particularly prone. My own theory is that most grandfathers don't give a rat's ass what happens to their kids at university, but grandmothers get very, very stressed. And this probably brings on coronary events. But anyway, he says that what he did is he looked at a week at the start of the term, and then he looked at the week before midterm exams and the week before final exams. And the thing he found was that approximately 1 out of 2,000 students have a family death experience in a normal week at the start of the course. But that increases to 1 in 200 during midterms and 1 in just a little over 100 during final exams. So basically, at midterm exams, the number of grannies who die are about 10 times more than the number who die normally. And at final exams, it's 19 times more. But he also looked at students' grades. And the other thing he found is that A students very seldom ever have a family death experience at exam time. But students who are D students or failing students are very, very prone to having family death experiences. And I can also attest to this because in the course that I used to teach, one of the courses I used to teach, I had about 700 students. And about 35 to 40 would always miss the final exam. They were always, almost always, exclusively the worst students in the class. So they would end up writing a makeup exam in January, and you could almost predict that anybody that was writing a makeup exam would fail the course. So out of 35 who write a makeup exam, maybe 3 would pass. So I can attest to at least the findings of his research as being relevant to myself. Now, things have changed considerably since 1990. Since 1990, what has happened is students no longer need to have an excuse to get a doctor's excuse. They just need a doctor's excuse that says, please excuse Johnny from his exam tomorrow because, and there's no because that's personal information. So the good news is this has probably saved the lives of thousands of grandmothers around the world because now they don't need a dead granny. All they need is an excuse from a doctor that says that they're not feeling well. And unfortunately, there are some doctors who, I won't mention any names, but I happened to notice one year that I had about 20 excuses from the same doctor, all for students of a particular cultural background that I won't mention. And one of the students happened to end up being a reasonably close friend of mine in later years at university. And I asked him about this, and he says, oh, everybody knows Dr. So-and-so. You just bring $20 and tell him you want a doctor's note, and he gives you one. He said, in fact, you don't even have to go. Sometimes one of us will collect $20 from all of our friends, and we'll go and we'll tell him we need 10 doctor's excuses. He takes the $200, gives us 10 excuses, and we can all miss the exam. Oh yeah, this is a thriving business in some parts of Ontario. Anyway, having given you a little bit of background, let me talk about some of my personal experiences. I've had students give me all kinds of reasons for missing exams. One of my favorites was a student from Brampton, I have to tell you Brampton because that's part of the story, who sent me an email the day after the exam and said he was very sorry he missed the exam, but he was in a car accident on his way to the exam and couldn't make it. So could he please write a makeup? Unfortunately for him, he sent me a bunch of pictures of the car accident to prove that he really did have a car accident. So not being totally naive, I looked at the pictures very carefully and I said, I'm going to have some fun with this guy. So I said, well, on Monday morning, come into my office and we'll talk about it. So he showed up. And the first thing I said to him was, I looked on the news weather and it said that Brampton was sunny on Saturday afternoon at 4 o'clock. These pictures show a very wet and rainy Brampton. He said, oh, well, that's the part of Brampton I live in. It rained there. It was sunny in the other part of Brampton. I said, okay, well, that makes sense. I said, I should tell you that I'm a reasonably serious amateur photographer. And when I look at these pictures, these shadows to me suggest that this happened about 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning. And you're telling me this happened at 4:30 in the afternoon on your way to the exam. He said, oh, those are afternoon pictures. He said, the shadows may look a little strange, but I assure you they were taken in the afternoon. So I said, okay, I'm going to give him one more chance. I said, I noticed these pictures were taken with an iPhone 6S. And unfortunately, they were taken back in June. This is sort of 5 months before the accident. Are smartphones that smart? They can take pictures 5 months before an accident occurs? He just looks at me and he says, well, shit, you got me. I said, well, good. You can sign up for the course again and pay another $600 in January. And basically, I gave him a zero. He's one of my favorites, but I've had others. Let me just see if I can look at a couple quickly here. I've had a student bring me a doctor's note that they weren't feeling well and had to miss the exam. And when I looked at it very carefully, it wasn't a medical doctor, it was a dentist. And that looks all right because that's legitimate as well. So I said to the student, I see you went to a dentist and not a medical doctor. She said, yes, it was a very bad toothache. I said, did you happen to notice that the dentist's phone number is, and I forget the area code, I think it was 604. He said, is out in Calgary. I said, did you sort of fly out there to have your tooth looked at and come back? And she said, no, he's here. I said, I lied a little bit here because in law enforcement, you're allowed to lie a little bit to people when you're interrogating them. So I said, well, I called the Ontario Dental Association and they've never heard of this dentist. But I did find that there's one who has a dental practice in the city of Calgary. She said, yeah, well, I couldn't come up with the doctor's note. So I thought this is one that I had. I'd slipped this one past you. I said, well, that one didn't work. One of my other favorites. I used to teach 2 courses in first year. I used to teach the Introduction to Business course that had about 700 students. Fortunately, I never had to do any grading. I just was the stand and deliver guy and somebody else did all the grading for me. But I had 700 students in that course. And then I taught another course, first year course, which was Business Communications. And it only had 28 students. So this one year, the students all write together in the gym. There's about 800 students that sit in the gym and write exams. And the business communications course is restricted to about 30 to 45 students maximum per section. So there's a number of different instructors and a number of different sections of the course. And the students all have to sit together in the gym for each course. So I'm going through and I see that I've got 24 students of mine sitting in 2 rows. And there's 4 students missing because I had 28 of them. So Jackie Glennie, who was teaching several of the other courses, I went over to Jackie and I said, I'm missing 4 of my students. And she said, oh, they're over there in the back corner. She said, there's 4 there I don't recognize. They must be yours. So I went over and looked and sure enough they were. So I said, come on over and sit with the rest of the class. I had all 28 students there, no missing students. Good thing. About an hour into the exam, I see Jackie at the other end of the gym and she goes like this. And I thought she's waving to me, so I go like this. But she wasn't waving. She was telling me that I had 5 students. She found another one. And I went over and I said, no, that's not possible. I said, I've got 28 students registered in the course. I've got 28 students over here. He's not mine. And she said, well, he's not mine. I don't recognize him. So I went over and I said, who was your instructor? He says, you were, sir. I said, well, I don't have you on the class list and I don't have any unaccounted for students. Is there any possibility that you're not registered in the course? He said, oh no, I registered. He said, I've been going all year. And then all of a sudden it struck me. I said, oh, are you in the Intro to Business course? He said, yes. I said, well, this is the business communications course. The Intro to Business course exam was 3 nights ago. You missed it. I said, you're writing the wrong exam. So now we're into the exam. He didn't even realize that he was writing a wrong exam and wasn't appropriate. And he said, well, what am I supposed to do? I said, well, you register again in January and you do the course all over again. I said, because there's no legitimate reason for you to get a makeup. You know, I don't give makeups because of your stupidity. So see you in January. And that was the end. I used to be quite hard-nosed. In fact, one student on the course evaluations rating me said, he's as nasty as a Nazi, but he's funny as hell. Do I have another one here? The dentist, the Brampton car accident. Oh, here's one. Here's a good one. This is actually a joke, but it also happened in real life to a friend of mine who was a university professor at Memorial University of Newfoundland, the most anally retentive person I have ever met in my whole entire life. But he had 2 students who missed one of his exams, and they showed up at his door and said, unfortunately, they had a flat tire coming up from the shore on the way to the exam. And they had to miss the exam. Could they have a makeup? And he was smart enough, he interviewed them separately. He called one of them into his office and he said, which tire on the car was flat? The student said it was the right passenger side, or the front passenger side. And then he called the other student in and he says, which tire on the car was flat? He said, it was the rear tire on the driver's side. So right away he knew he had them. Now there's a joke that was around about that, but this actually happened to a professor at Newfoundland while I was there. In terms of excuses, the best one I ever got was a student who sent me an email and said, sorry, I missed last night's class, sir, but my cat had fleas. Now, before you don't laugh, this wasn't an undergraduate student, this was an MBA student. The best, some of you may know Sharon Broderick here in the city. Sharon used to teach with me in the same department. And she told me her favorite was a student who passed an assignment in late and said, sorry, my assignment's late, but the parrot pooped in my printer. So it's a student who didn't know much about business, but she would have been great in English because she really understood alliteration. Anyway, in closing, I just want to tell you about why we have problems with students at university. This is my own feeling now. Don't take this totally to heart. I know there are some very, very good high school teachers out there, some of them who take their job very, very seriously. But unfortunately, what I see in first-year university is students who come totally unprepared for university. Many of them can barely read and write, and they've got no interest in learning how to do either. And that's because they get rewarded with very high grades in high school for very mediocre performance. Now, just to give you an example, I wrote a textbook called Introduction to Business, and I used to use the text in business. Very, very simple text, and it's very readable. It's got lots of pictures. But what we try to do in that course is teach them the language of business and give them a little bit of theory about finance, about marketing, about human resources, about economics, and various other subjects, nothing in depth. One of the questions I frequently asked them on the exams was, name the 4 products in the product classification and give me an example of each. That's a very, very simple thing. Probably less than half of the students can answer that question. Just so you know, the answer is convenience, shopping, specialty, and unsought goods. Okay. Here's just a smattering. I've got 350 answers that I've written down from students. Here's just some of them. Simple, complex, technological, and I can't remember the other one. Essential, non-essential, luxury, and emergency. Social products, psychological products, safety products, and miscellaneous products. Inferior, prestige, augmented, and special products. Goods, services, wants, and needs. Tangible, intangible, perishable, and storage goods. Necessities, non-necessities, transportation, and others. Primary, secondary, tertiary, and geographic. Household, technology, edible, and clothing. Makeup, smartphones, music, and videos. High need, low need, high want, and low want. Necessity, everyday, investment, and just because products. Pure goods, pure services, mixed goods, and mixed services. That's just an example. Now, very simple question, but the problem is students don't buy textbooks, and even those that buy textbooks don't bother reading them, and half of them don't come to class, so they don't get any notes from your lecture because I don't give PowerPoint slides. You know, they think I'm terrible because I don't give them PowerPoint slides because I want them to think more than just whatever they see on a PowerPoint slide. So I guess the student was pretty right when he said he's as strict as a Nazi, but funny as hell. Anyway, that's just some experiences. That's a little bit of my teaching experience. At some point, maybe I'll come back and do a cameo and talk to you a little bit about the fun of research. So thank you very much.